Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi, to a quick look at the upcoming characters for next patch. So, we have gotten our leaks on Columbina, on Zibai, and on, I think you're supposed to say Illuga, but I feel like that's not what they wrote down, so I get confused. Anyways, I want to just give a quick rundown of what the characters do, and early thoughts on what I think about them. Although, quick disclaimer, usually I try to record these videos right after Monday, because Mondays are usually when there's changes for beta stuff. So by the time this video is posted, there might already be a couple changes. So check the pinned comment to see if there are any major changes. And because of that, I'm not going to put too much emphasis on their current power. But I do want to talk about the kits because I think there's a lot to say. So let's just start with Columbina. Hydro Catalyst, she's an HP scaler. She's got like the average base HP that HP scalers usually do. It's actually the exact same number as a bunch of other HP scalers. Base attack and base events are like very low, which is kind of funny, but whatever. Crit Ascension, cool. Columbina is kind of designed to be the like generic support for Nodcry, and they actually did end up giving her the passive that converts reactions to their lunar variants. Next patch is seeing the release of Lunar Crystallize, and she converts all three: Electrocharge, Bloom, and Crystallize. Only Hydro, not other elements. Hydro Crystallize get converted to Lunar Charge, Lunar Bloom, and Lunar Crystallize. The other characters that convert reactions also give a base damage increase of 14%. Because she does it to all of them, it's 7% instead. She also gives an extra effect to all of those reactions. So for Lunar Charge, she makes the cloud attack faster. Now that doesn't affect the frequency of hits on direct talent damage from like Inefa's Brigida, for example. It's only the reaction damage itself. It'll happen every 1.5 seconds instead of every 2 seconds. For Lunar Bloom, on top of the Verdant Dew that you already get, you get an extra type of dew called Moonridge Dew. These dews get generated at the same time as normal Verdant Dews. So in other words, what it means is that your first 3 Verdant Dews generate 1 extra, and your total amount that you can have stored at the same time is going to be 6. This effectively allows Llama to use her Hold E in Neferteams, on top of a bunch of other stuff outside of Neferteams that we'll talk about as well. And finally, for Lunar Crystallize, new reaction when you trigger Lunar Crystallize. So when you trigger Hydro Crystallize with Columbina or Zibai on your team, you generate 3 Geoconstructs around the enemy. Those constructs, as far as I've seen, don't get broken by collision. So they're like Kachina's Thing, Tornado, or Ushi, not like Zhongli's Pillar or Albedo's Flower that get destroyed. Anyways, those 3 constructs will stay there for a little bit, and once you've triggered Lunar Crystallize 3 times, each of them will fire off a projectile onto the enemy. So basically, every time you trigger Lunar Crystallize, it's the equivalent of doing Lunar Crystallize damage 1 time. The way the formula works is the base damage is a bit lower than Lunar Charge. It's a little bit over half of the damage of Lunar Charge. And just like Lunar Charge, it looks at the stats of all the characters involved, not just the character who ended up being triggered. Funny thing about that is it counts as constructs for all the things that require constructs, so like Chiori, for example. But in my eyes, more importantly, it counts as constructs for Zhongli's Pillar Resonance. And because they get spawned around the enemy by default, they hit pretty consistently. And it's 3 of them, which means that Zhongli is actually becoming a pretty decent off-field geo applicator now. Anyways, I'll talk a lot more about that in the pre-release, but for now I just wanted to quickly mention it. Anyways, for Lunar Crystallize, what Columbina does is she makes it so that instead of firing 3 times, you fire 4 times whenever you do 3 reactions, right? Each pillar has a chance to double hit. It's a 33% chance to double hit. So it's basically just 33% more Lunar Crystallize damage instances. Unfortunately, Lunar Crystallize damage just from the reaction is far from enough to carry a team. So this is just like a little bit extra for Lunar Crystallize teams. It's not really enough to, for example, go for like a fully Noel build and have her triggering a bunch of Lunar Crystallize like that. Passive that gives her crit rate, very cool stats, wow. Let's talk about her actual kit. Her burst gives you lunar reaction damage. On level 10, it's 40%. 40% reaction damage is honestly not that much. For reference, the Ascendant Gleam passive can get you up to 36. The new set that's coming out next patch, the 4-piece, is giving you 60%. I know C6 is 35. It's nice, but it's not like an insanely big deal. Most of what she actually does does is in the skill, not in the burst. So let's look at her skill. Awaken Moonbound Tides, dealing AoE Hydro damage and summoning Gravity Ripple. Gravity Ripple will follow the active character on the field while continuously dealing AoE Hydro damage to surrounding opponents. While it's on the field and nearby party members trigger lunar reactions or inflict lunar reaction damage, Columbina will accrue a special gravity. Once gravity is filled to its limit, different types of damage will be dealt to enemies based on the type of lunar reaction that has accumulated the most gravity for Columbina. The way that the gravity works is whenever you trigger a reaction, a lunar reaction, or deal lunar reaction damage, basically anything that does lunar things, you get gravity for 2 seconds, and over those 2 seconds, you generate 20 gravity. Once you reach 60 gravity, her skill does damage, and the damage type is going to be one of the lunar types, whichever one you triggered the most of. So if it was lunar charge, it'll be lunar charge damage. If it was lunar bloom, it'll be lunar bloom damage, and same for lunar crystallize. In other words, as long as you're triggering lunar reactions semi-consistently, Columbina's skill is a lunar hit every 6 seconds, because it's 20 gravity every 2 seconds, and at 60, it does the damage. During that time, the skill is also doing just normal hydro damage, and that hydro damage is every 2 seconds. It's all HP scaling, right? So she doesn't have like a different scaling based on which reaction she do, thank goodness, because that would have been a bit of a pain in the ass to build. But yeah, the lunar charge damage is 9.44. Lunar charge damage from talents gets multiplied by 3, so in practice it's 28.3% of her HP. The lunar bloom damage is 3.45 times, and this one does not get increased. And lunar crystallize is 17.71, and this one does get increased by 1.6 times instead of 3 times. So basically, the damage for lunar charge and lunar crystallize is basically the same value, and for lunar bloom it's a bit lower. However, for lunar bloom it's 5 hits, and Llama has a flat buff to lunar bloom damage that applies to each hit, which means when you have Llama, this procs her burst buff 5 times, which means that out of the 3, Columbina's personal damage tends to be noticeably higher if you're including this Llama buff as part of Columbina's damage in Bloom teams than in other teams. Anyways, by default, she generally lends herself pretty well to 18-ish second rotation, so you'll get 3 instances of either of those 3, plus your burst and whatnot. Right now, the numbers are like definitely overtuned. Columbina as a whole seems a bit too good. She's working really well for like pretty much every lunar archetype, and she's also creating some like new lunar archetypes, and part of that is because honestly the hydro damage she does is, in my opinion, too high. I kind of hope to see that nerfed. She ends up doing an amount of hydro damage that's like, just in terms of motion value, like 3/4 of what Yelan does, but that's all that Yelan does in terms of damage, and it's not even the majority of Columbina's damage. On top of that, it's relatively slow application, fast enough for reactions, but slow enough to consistently vape it with no ICD. So like, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Honestly, I really hope they nerf that, because lunar stuff aside, I don't know how I feel about a character whose main source of damage isn't the hydro damage, out damaging characters whose main source of damage is hydro damage. Anyways, but yeah, so because her numbers, like her base numbers right now are so high, she's also playable outside of lunar teams. Like she'll be a pretty good unit for Skirk just because she's a hydro catalyst, so she can give TTDS and has pretty decent personal damage. She also has a special charge attack, so if you don't have Nefer and you want to play her with Llama, you can have Columbina consume the Vernon dues you're generating, not just Llama, which is nice because otherwise you wouldn't have anything to do with those extra dues. The charge attack is pretty bad, like compared to Nefer it's pathetic, but it procs Llama's quills, and I'm calling them quills because the first character that had something like this was Shenhe. Just know that when I say quills, I'm talking about the Llama Burst buff. In Nefer teams right now, you get 18 of these quills because you can't hold E on Llama because of the Verdun do. But with Columbina, you can hold E on Llama. So you can get up to 36 quills instead, and Columbina can use up all of them. Or Nefer can use half, and Columbina's skill can use basically almost all of the other remaining half. Anyways, right now, Columbina seems like an upgrade in Flynn's teams and Nefer teams. Gonna be a pretty solid carry herself, but I am expecting some nerfs on this character, honestly. Next, before we talk about Zibai, let's quickly talk about Illuga, because he's a dedicated support only for her. He is 4-star, Geo character, polearm, EM Ascension, clearly intended for Lunar Crystallize, but he does not allow you to Lunar Crystallize, which means that if you don't get either Columbina or Zibai, what the He does at least have the moonsign because he's a lightkeeper, but yeah. He's a split scaler with defense and EM, but mainly he's a buffer, right? His skill deals a little bit of damage, whatever. His burst is the main thing that you care about. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to summarize it. He also has a quill-like effect, right? A flat damage buff that can be used a certain amount of times. At a baseline, it's 21, but it's increased when you have geo-constructs, including the pillars generated from Lunar Crystallize. And because you should only really be playing him in teams that do Lunar Crystallize, it's always increased. And it's increased to 36 because it's 5 per construct up to 15. So he basically always gets 36 instances of increasing your on-field character's geo damage by a percentage of his EM. The increase is pathetic and terrible. It's even worse than Yunjin. However, if it increases Lunar Crystallize damage instead of normal geo damage, the increase is much larger. 57 to normal geo damage at level 9, 480 for Lunar Crystallize. And then on top of that, Lunar Crystallize doesn't get reduced by enemy defense. So yeah, this is this is kind of a big deal, but it means that he's like pretty much worthless for anything other than Zibai, because he doesn't increase geo damage. He increases geo damage of characters, normal, charge, skill, burst. Plunge? Is there plunge? Yeah, there is plunge. What that means is that the reaction damage from the pillars cannot proc this. So unless a character directly has Lunar Crystallize damage in their kit, the only buff they'll ever get is the first one, the pathetic one. So this character is basically completely dog shit for anyone other than Zibai. One thing I will say is his Constellation 2 allows him to get a bunch of off-field damage during his burst based on the amount of quills you consume. And the damage of this C2 isn't that bad. So like, if you really want to make use of him and you don't end up going for Zibai, it's not like completely worthless. Like it's not Yunjin bad, but it's like Kachina bad. Think about it that way, basically. And then finally, his passives. He gives Geo crit rate and crit damage. 5 crit rate, 10 crit damage, so 20 CV. And if you're an Ascendant Gleam, he also gives 50 EM. Also, the effects of his burst are enhanced based on the amount of Hydro and Geo characters that you have. So it's kind of like Escoffier, kind of like Skirk or whatever. However, unlike those, the increase is a lot smaller. So it's increased by 7, 14, or 24. So if you only end up with like 3 Geo or Hydro instead of 4, you're only missing on 10% out of like 80-ish, which isn't that big of a deal. It's not like missing out on 40% shred from Escoffier. Same thing for Lunar Crystallize, and the Lunar Crystallize number is increased by 60, 120, 200. Constellations, C1 gives him energy. C2, as I've already mentioned, gives him a bit of off-field. Annoying thing about this is that without this Constellation, he has no off-field damage, which means he cannot proc the Serenade set from off-field. So you kind of need his C2 for him to be able to proc Serenade. Otherwise, you want to build him on something else, which can be a bit annoying. C4 gives the active party member 200 defense. C6 buffs his passive. Instead of 20 CV, 50 EM, it'll be 50 CV, 80 EM. So it's plus 30 CV, plus 30 EM. And the only character who is actually going to want to have Illuga on the team is Zibai. So let's go through what she does. Base HP, whatever. Base attack, whatever. Base defense, 957. She is a defense scaler. Crit damage ascension, very cool. Normal attacks don't really matter. She allows you to trigger Lunar Crystallize. And the main thing that she does is she deals damage through her skill. So let's talk about what her skill does. Elemental skill, Heaven and Earth Made Manifest. Summoning a shadow of her former powers, she switches to the Lunar Phase Shift mode. In this mode, Zibai's normal attacks and charge attacks will do geo damage that cannot be overridden, and she can accumulate special Phase Shift Radiance. Think of it as Night Soul. Zibai can consume Radiance to unleash the special elemental skill Spirit Steed's Stride. She does normal attacks, builds up her bar, and then when the bar is filled up enough, she uses a special skill. Anyways, how does it work more specifically? It lasts for 15 seconds. When she has at least 70 Radiance, she can use her special skill. It costs 70, and you're capped at 100, not at 70, so you don't have to use skill as soon as you get it. You have a little bit of wiggle room, and she can gain Radiance by existing during the skill, by doing normal attacks, and when you're in an Ascendant Gleam, which you should always be, by triggering Lunar Crystallize. Generally, what she's going to be doing is she's going to be doing 4 normal attacks and then an E and repeat. The exact timing seems a little sus, where you kind of need to wait like half a second after your N4 so you can E properly. So I'm sure we'll find some optimization on combos by the time she gets released. But anyways, her base gameplay loop is you skill, 4 normals, skill, repeat. You can do this a total of 4 times, and then you start over. So the way that the skill works, right, is when you do the N4 is just normal geo damage, but on the 4th hit of the normal attack, you get an extra hit of Lunar Crystallize, and then the enhanced skill, the special skill that you can do during your uptime, is also 1 hit of Geo and 1 hit of Lunar Crystallize. And then the Burst is also 1 hit of Geo and then 1 hit of Lunar Crystallize. As I talked about earlier when I talked about Columbina, Lunar Crystallize numbers are times 1.6 for some reason. Right now, Zibai is looking pretty strong. Because we still haven't seen much like combo optimization yet, it's hard to get a proper feel for exactly how strong she is. I've learned my lesson from Nefer, okay? I'm not trusting leaker gameplay ever again. we will wait, but she's definitely not looking bad at the very least. She's at least gonna be on a similar level to the other non-crack carries we've had so far. I think right now she's looking a little bit stronger, arguably. The main thing about her is that obviously her best team is going to have Columbina, just like every other non-crack carry will. I think that the increase that she gets from Columbina is a bit bigger than the other non-crack carries, but unlike the other non-crack carries, she's not coming out with her own dedicated 5-star support that is made for her. Her like dedicated support is a 4-star that's going to be on her banner, which means that she's arguably going to get to, like, if you're looking at just the amount of 5-stars on the team, she's probably getting a little bit more out of a 2 5-star team than the other non-cry carries right now. If you're looking at optimal teams, I haven't finished my calcs on Columbina, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's similar, maybe a little bit worse. She's in that ballpark, basically. Passives that I haven't mentioned, she also has a passive that increases her stats based on the Geo and Hydro party members, and just like Illuga, it's not that big of a deal, which I think is really good. I'm glad it's there, but not big enough to like completely dismiss teams that don't follow it. Right, that was one of my biggest issues with Skirk and Escoffier, was that you basically get nothing from having 3. You get everything from the 4th one, and it just feels kind of tragic. And then the first Ascension passive, it increases the motion value of her skill, both the Geo and the Lunar Charge hit. Overall, she's looking alright, but kind of uninteresting. It just feels like a redo of Kinich, different flavor, different color. Like it's like yellow-brown damage instead of yellow-green damage. Woohoo! But yeah, I'm not too excited about her kit. I was initially really excited about Illuga's kit, and then I realized that the Lunar Crystallize bonus doesn't apply to the reaction damage, only to direct talent damage. And now I'm just completely and utterly devastated. And then Columbina is like kind of what we expected, honestly. She is an Archon that is pretty much taking all of the non-cry teams and giving them 20k DPS, sometimes less, sometimes more, but around that. But let's see what the beta's got in store for us in the next few weeks. Personally, I'm hoping for Columbina nerfs. I think Illu is fine. Zibai is a bit too strong, but I think that if you nerf Columbina, that's also an indirect nerf to Zibai, so you don't even need to nerf her. Anyways, honestly, the meta's looking cooked. Pretty much all of these non-cry carries right now are looking to reach Mawika's level, if not more. If we don't see any changes, I'm not too happy about that. I mean, on one hand, I do think it would be nice for Mawika to not be as dominant in the meta anymore. On the other hand, I guess if you don't have the new characters, you, I guess. Anyways, it is what it is. Hope you enjoyed my very pessimistic outlook on these upcoming characters. Hope you learned a thing or two, and as usual, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.